Well, De Palma, I'll tell you personally, he is actually my favorite director. He is much harder to really pin down because he has a few more modes of expression. Not that I don't think that John Carpenter or Tobe Hooper could also make great films outside of the horror genre, but Brian De Palma has had the opportunity, perhaps because some of his earlier films were a little more towards the thriller side, and not so close to the slasher or savage cinema side. He's been able to also go out and do these fantastic crime movies like Carlito's Way and things like that.
Yeah.
He's also done quote unquote mainstream films like The Untouchables and Mission Impossible, and done really well with them. I think those are terrific mainstream films. So, De Palma is my favorite director, but, if you look at sort of a horror continuum, he's a little more on the thriller end, the needle points a little more that way than towards what some people might consider, hardcore horror. So, De Palma, I think is extremely gifted with visuals, like John Carpenter. He also clearly has, this gallows humor, this social satirist side of him, which is a bit like Wes Craven. Wes Craven has that social commentary side, and yet De Palma also has, like Tobe Hooper, this idea of, well, let's break decorum, let's not reestablish order at the end of the film, like in Sisters. Let's Hitchcock always reestablished order, but De Palma, like Tobe Hooper, will send you off in a different narrative direction altogether. So, De Palma incorporates a lot of what those other directors do, but he sort of escaped the ghetto of horror, and I don't think horror is a ghetto, but that's how our culture looks at horror, unfortunately. Yeah. He doesn't have a title like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre or The Last House on the Left, which you look at as, ooh, horror, horror, horror. You look at Sisters or something else, Dressed to Kill, and you think more Psycho. You think Vertigo. You know what I'm saying? You think more towards that end. So that's where I see De Palma as fitting in. That he's got all those great qualities of those other directors, but he's been able to practice them more outside the horror genre, I think.
Yeah. Tell me your thoughts on his, for lack of a better term, his director for hire kind of projects that he didn't necessarily originate, like the Mission Impossibles and the Carlito's Ways and that kind of thing. Where do you think his voice comes through in those?
I think that De Palma's voice comes through very strongly in those mainstream films. I guess that's the best way to put it. Sort of audience popular films. I think that he's great in that mode, and I love him in that mode because everybody enjoys sort of a mainstream film, but he brings such intelligence to them. For instance, his idea for Mission Impossible was much more about the technology and the science, and De Palma was able to sort of exercise his hobby in science. The gadgetry, the high tech stuff, the cutting edge stuff, and also, he's amazing with an action scene. Like if you look at The Untouchables, he stages this incredible action scene on the staircase of the train station. But of course, being De Palma, it has to reflect back to the 1925 film Battleship Potemkin and the famous Odessa step sequence.
Right.
So it's like on one hand, it's like an action scene, but on another hand, you get De Palma's trademark intertextuality, if that's a word, if I can say that, is that it reflects to something back in film history that fascinates him and it carries a deeper meaning. And if you look at Mission Impossible, that was really the dawn of sort of the CG age, and the way he visualized that train chase, which today seems commonplace, but at the time we had not seen things like that before, where sort of people are blown towards the screen by an explosion, and it just seemed very real and very intimate, and his visuals are always strong like that. He was on the cutting edge of doing things like that, which now everybody does, so it seems commonplace. It's almost impossible to go back and look at Mission Impossible and see how forward-thinking that was.
Well, I think with Mission Impossible particularly, it's a movie I think people now, upon reflection, are recognizing as one of the best examples of the genre from that decade. And I recall being in the theater during that whole disc theft scene.
Right.
and the soundtrack is absolutely silent, where other directors might, amp it up more than it needs to be with score or something. And I said this on the last tribute show we did to De Palma 3 years ago. Everyone was so quiet in that theater. They were such active participants in what was going on screen. And you got the feeling that they were being so quiet because they didn't want to alert the guy that Tom Cruise was hanging above him. They were so involved. And he does that. You are an active participant in his films.
Well, De Palma assumes not only your participation, but also your intellect, your intelligence. He's the polar opposite of many directors today who assume the audience's stupidity. He assumes your intelligence. He doesn't over-explain. Sometimes he hardly explains at all. And, I'll be honest, I'm a big fan of the TV series Mission Impossible. And back when the movie came out, I was sort of in fanboy mode. And I was like, oh, well, they don't have the cast members. And, it's one person. It's not a team. And all those things are true, but you have to look at each sort of work of art for itself, and the film is like undeniably brilliant. Yes, Peter Graves isn't in it, and Tom Cruise is the undeniable star. Those are sort of the things that had to be worked with. But as far as what the film is, he made a daring and original film based on that idea, which is pretty much the same thing he did with The Untouchables. It's not like the TV series. It's a very different ball game, and so even where he's doing in our culture this sort of remake reimagination obsession, even when he's doing those kind of films, he's bringing his own high level of intellect and gamesmanship to those projects. I mean, in a way that's just really staggering. Now, personally, I would have loved Martin Landau to be in Mission Impossible, but that's the war in my head. As a kid who loved Mission Impossible, growing up.
Yeah.
Oh, I miss Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, but
apparently he tried to get all of the original cast members, but they didn't like the idea of being killed at the very beginning.
That's right. I did interview Martin Landau. He said, no, you're just going to bring us back to kill us. I don't want to do that. I understand. Of course, I understand both points of view. But but as I've gotten to be older and sort of more experienced in how I write and my criticism, I see that, and in this culture where everything is a remake, if you're just going to shout down something on the basis of the fact it's a remake, you're going to miss a lot of good things because so many remakes are being made. So that's sort of where I've come to. And so you go back and you look at Mission Impossible today, and you say, that is really good. That's a really good variation on a theme. You know what I mean? It's not the TV show, but it's a really good variation on that theme. And De Palma brings such precision and meticulous attention to detail, to the film that it's really, I think, an amazing film. I have it on Blu-ray, and it just sort of, blew me out the back wall of my TV room watching it. It's much better than people said, I think.
Amongst the filmmakers of today, I think probably Tarantino is the most vocal about his appreciation of De Palma. But where do you see his influence? Do you see it pop up in different films today?
I wish I would see more of it, to tell you the truth. I mean, I did watch Inglourious Bastards a couple weeks ago, and I was astonished that the last sequence in the French movie theater where Hitler is going to go down. The production design made it look like Tony Montana's home at the end of Scarface, and some of the framing was reminiscent of Carrie. And so I totally agree. I totally see the De Palma touch in Tarantino, but I don't see a lot of it in other directors. And the reason why that's the case, I believe, is that, and we may be coming out of it, but I think there's become a certain amount of laziness in a lot of the directors we see today, which is that, the computer today can do anything. So what you do is you stand two people in front of a green screen, and you can project anything behind them, and then the digital artists create wonderful things. But you're left with what seems like a very stagnant moment. I mean, nobody is doing, or very few people are doing, these amazing, tracking shots that are like a Mobius strip. Nobody's doing these, extended, 6-minute takes like De Palma did, because you can't walk somebody through that green screen kind of, background. And I think there's this real attitude of, we'll tart it up with special effects. It'll get fixed in post-production. So it's really not important how we have the people standing and what they represent. Whereas, Brian De Palma, he said, film grammar, is like that's Hitchcock's language, and he uses that language of film grammar to mean things. Blocking means something, lighting means something. What angle you choose to show somebody at, it means something. If you use a long take, it expresses some kind of meaning. It's not just a flashy visual. People will say, well, he's just stylish, and but it doesn't mean anything. But it does. All those things, are part of the technical language of film and make you feel a certain way. And a lot of the directors today, it's very depressing. They just don't do that. They just don't use that language. It's the language of computers, and it's not. And again, that makes me sound old and cranky. Some stuff is great. I like a special effects extravaganza as much as the next person, but it's not. That's not De Palma's heir. That's not De Palma's legacy. He's not that way. He's not a post-production guy. He plans meticulously. Those shots are hard to do. They take a lot of time, and they're planned down to the last detail.
There's also something, and maybe this isn't a good point. Maybe it's too thin a line to distinguish, but there seems to be a fear of the operatic. I see plenty of over-the-top films, but there's a certain tone to De Palma's best films that are like opera. There's a boldness to them, a provocateur kind of quality to them that I think is missing.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and some people just laugh when they hear sort of the DiMaggio soundtracks. They're like, this sounds like a soap opera or something. They kind of don't get it because, again, you have to look at De Palma in the continuum of where he sort of shows up in film history. He's, to some people he's the next Hitchcock. To some people he's the American Godard. He's sort of a fusion of those two, but he follows them and then precedes this whole new generation. And so he comes from what is a more artificial, less naturalistic time than what we have now. Today we want everything to be the gritty realism and have very little theatricality, have very little artificiality. And that's why we're seeing so much with shaky cam and that sort of, and quick cuts. We're looking. It's more like first-person experiential kind of cinema than his, which was, there was a more operatic quality to it. If you listen, to the scores for Psycho or North by Northwest or something like that, it's very operatic, and I think the same is true of De Palma's films. He creates this dreamlike quality with his music, the slow motion, the long extended cuts. You sort of are swept into this dream vision of another world. The only way I can describe it really is lyrical. You're sort of brought into this lyrical mode, and you're just following along with the camera, through the twisting corridors of the museum and Dressed to Kill, and it's fascinating. To me, it's utterly mesmerizing. But other people are going to say, well, nobody's talking. We don't know who people are. She's not telling us how she feels. Today we want all of our answers, and we want all of our answers right now, and that's not how De Palma works. You have to sort of interpret it. He leaves room for the audience to think about it instead of spoon feeding you all the answers right at once, so you have no mysteries. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I was telling this to Keith Horton. I said I don't understand why every film geek doesn't get behind De Palma, because his films, they are pure cinema. You talk about they are told visually. You can turn down the volume and you can follow every motion in that film. And that's always been a strength of his, and I think that's why he chose the horror or the thriller genre at first, because he could use that gift to tell stories in that genre.
I think you're right. I've always been baffled why he hasn't been held in higher esteem. I think a lot of it has to do with what happened in the 80s around the time of Body Double. A lot of his work has been misinterpreted as being anti-female or misogynist. And so, it's like shouting racist or sexist. If somebody does that, you back away from them. You can't say, well, I like De Palma, too loud, because someone's going to say, well, his films are terribly sexist, when they're not really. People will say, if it's not that, they say, well, he's just a voyeur. He's looking in on all these, there's some perverse angle to it. And to me, I just say, well, you might judge it perverse, but it's part of human nature. And what fascinates De Palma clearly is not it's not voyeurism per se. It's the art of seeing. He likes to do movies about how we see things. He likes to, it's like, how do our eyes misinterpret things? One of his famous statements is that the camera lies, 24 times a second,
Mm-hmm.
And so how can he deceive us? How does human sight, how do our own eyes lie to us? How do our eyes interpret things? I think that's what his movies are about. But it's easy to say that's voyeurism, or necessarily that's sexism. But of course, if you look at Body Double, it's a complete satire of Hollywood, with the big-breasted, body double in the, horror movie kind of thing. It's not meant to degrade women. It's about the culture of Hollywood, and you have to be able to step back and see that, But if you're just looking to be offended, I guess some people will be offended.
Well, I do want to touch on the kind of unfair cries of misogyny in a few of these films, but there are a couple of stumbling blocks, preconceived notions about De Palma that have to be grappled with when you talk about his work, and I think the obvious is the Hitchcock comparison. And we talk about the Hitchcock influence and the Godard influence in De Palma, and you actually open up your review of Sisters with a quote from Godard that says, "It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to." So, given De Palma's influences, like a Hitchcock, how do you see him taking those influences and transcending them, taking them to another place?
I feel very strongly. I really believe that message. I get behind that 100%, which is that, it's essentially something like there are no new stories under the sun. It's how you tell them. And so I think De Palma very much looks at Hitchcock and Godard as the language of film. That's where he pulls from. So he pulls things from that, the way we would pull a turn of phrase, in fan culture, like jump the shark or, fanboy or something. He's pulling those sentences out, but then he's putting them in a new composition. So, I think you're going to be very sad and you're going to like very few movies in this world if the only thing that counts to you is how original it is. By your perception, because, if there are really only 7 stories to tell, they've all been told. It's what you do with the stories. It's the personal imprint. It's the vision you bring to them. It's the style, the intellect you bring to the stories you tell. And I really believe that quote, and I think it really describes De Palma, to perfection. Is that he's very well versed, in this previous generation of filmmakers, and he considers that the sort of psychic foundation of film. And he pulls from that foundation of film it's that intertextuality to maybe mislead us. Again, it's a way of how we see things. Like, so, we expect somebody to die in the first act if this is like Psycho, but it's not, or, you know what I'm saying? It plays on our expectations, that he's going to be using these sentences, but he uses the sentences in entirely new paragraphs, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And with Sisters, I just rewatched it again last week. I'll just point out a couple of things that struck me, and you can comment. Starting with that opening, I think it's 25-minute opening before it really steps into high gear and you see the direction it's going. After 25 minutes, after the first murder, it's a shock to the system. And then the movie, it's lunacy. It's giddy lunacy beyond that point. Tell me about that quality of De Palma, the kind of master manipulator quality, where he oftentimes he'll open his film with something mundane like a game show or something dreamy like the shower sequence in Dress to Kill, and then he introduces that threatening element.
Well, I think if you think about it in terms of how you want to draw in an audience, a good way to do that is sort of to begin almost with, the kitchen sink reality. Because as you're sitting down to a movie, you're in real life, and if people have compared a movie to like a waking dream, you're dreaming but your eyes are open. So the idea, sometimes you start with the mundane, and then you escalate, and then it's easier to accept the escalation if you sort of start out in our reality. If you start immediately with something off the wall, you're going to be very off-putting to people. Like, well, this is just crazy. Now, obviously, in all cases, that's not true. We love the Bond films because those, these amazing pre-title sequences that, constantly try to, one-up the last one. But we've come to expect that. We've come to sit down and think they're gonna show us everything in the first 30 seconds they can do and wow us, and then, go from there. But we've been trained with the Bond movies for that. Otherwise, you want to sort of start in reality and escalate into, if it's a supernatural film, into the other world. If you start with those crazy things, you have nowhere to go, and it may be harder for people to get into it. I mean, that's my opinion, I think.
Yeah. What's also striking, and I guess this gets into his depiction of women. Sisters is led by two very strong female characters, and I think his use of female characters in his thrillers, he doesn't get enough credit for how he portrays women in his films. It's not the norm among your typical thriller, horror, slasher films the way he views women.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've never really bought the misogyny rap on him because I think you generally have very strong and interesting women in his films. Now, that doesn't mean terrible things don't happen to them, but terrible things happen to men in his films, too. I always like to point that out. It's not just the women. The men suffer pretty badly, too. Philip in that movie suffers really terribly in Sisters. Her boyfriend at the beginning, who we see in the split-screen death, he gets it pretty bad, too. It's not just, violence directed at women by any means. The thing that I find, so incredibly interesting about Sisters and the presentation of the women is, the character played by Jennifer Salt, Grace Collier is her name, right? And she's presented as this, very, liberated, intelligent reporter. And she's going to pursue the story, and then she ends the film, totally, hypnotized and brainwashed, and not knowing what's going on. And to me, that just floors me. I just think, wow, that's just something that Hitchcock would never do. It would be to lead his character on a trip like that and sort of not reassert order. And I really do think that goes back to, I think that's De Palma's statement about the times, this idea of him as sort of a real almost anti-establishment subversive, because certainly in real life in the 70s we were seeing that decorum, chivalry, those kind of things weren't necessarily operative anymore. We were in the midst of the Watergate scandal, so respect for the president wasn't really operative anymore, given what Nixon was doing, and maybe nor should it have been. The Vietnam War was raging, so the idea of sort of blind patriotism wasn't really operative anymore. All of these pillars of American belief were toppling, and so I find it fascinating. In a movie in the early 70s, he takes our stalwart hero or heroine, I guess, as the case may be, and at the end undercuts our pillar and our belief that the good guys are going to, come out of everything whole, and victorious, because she doesn't. I mean, yeah, I guess she's victorious. I guess she's alive, but that's not, that's not really.
But you're right. Really she is very anti-establishment. She attacks the establishment in her writing.
If you had ever written something like negative about the police, you couldn't run for office because people would say, "Oh, they're anti, law enforcement, they're anti-police." It's like you couldn't even do that today, and she was just a truth seeker. And again, you have to think about it. This was the age of Woodward and Bernstein, right? And Watergate, the crusading journalist, right? This was the age that was right about. And so, it's kind of shocking to think that the truth teller, the little man against City Hall or the little woman against City Hall, doesn't succeed. Because in the movies, we do expect them to succeed. The meme in our movies is always, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, or the cowboy rides in and fixes things, But this person doesn't get to really fix anything. That whole sense of movie decorum and language is undercut by his decision. And again, it's just something that Hitchcock would never, ever do. I mean, you look at Psycho and what a shocking film it is, and then it ends on a totally pedantic, let's restore order before people walk out upset, kind of ending with, you know what I mean, with the psychiatrist describing every nuance of Norman Bates' psychosis, so that we all can take a breather and say, okay, so that explains it all. De Palma lets the lunacy, as you described, to sort of lurk beyond the movie. You go out with the lunacy,
Right.
So to me, that's why I love De Palma.
I'm sorry. It also speaks to his kind of dark sense of humor that a lot of people don't get, and it's apparent in Sisters. I recall watching. I mean, obviously, I've seen Scarface a million times, but it took me a while to see the humor in Scarface because I was so taken by the overblown kind of operatic nature of it that one day I rewatched it. I said, "This is a funny movie," and there's a lot of that subversive humor in all of his movies, including Sisters.
He has a wicked sense of humor, and it really, it's just under the surface. And the thing is that I like about him so much is that his humor is about things that make us uncomfortable. And so our laugh, the first time where we kind of get it, it's sort of nervous laughter. But then when you get it, it's like real laughter. It's like, again, his films benefit from rewatching because you start to feel. I mean, there are a lot of films that I've reassessed my opinion of after seeing a second or third time. I think I saw Snake Eyes in the theater and I hated it. And then I watched it again recently, and I could see a lot of the stuff that was going on there. I thought, wow, this is really a better film than I thought it was the first time I saw it. And really all of his work, I think, stands up to that kind of scrutiny. I mean, it certainly stood the test of time, I think.
With starting with Sisters, we start to see some visual devices that he's employed throughout his career, like the split screen. How do you see, starting with Sisters, how he uses the split screen and what it does for this movie in particular?
Well, I love how he uses split screens, and he doesn't just use them one way. That's what's so cool about De Palma, is that just because he's used a technique once, that doesn't mean he's done with it or that he's going to use it the same way. For instance, in Carrie, I describe it as being like a cause and effect. Like on one side of the frame is Carrie, looking at somebody who has, bullied her, and then on the other side of the frame, is the effect, the telekinetic blast, burning somebody up or something. So it's like a literal cause and effect at the power of thought. It sort of takes out the middleman, the requirement for a cut. We're seeing it all happen spontaneously to us. But in Sisters, what I think is so interesting about how he uses split screen is that he's able to take out, minutes of exposition and introduction and characterization by literally transitioning us from, Janet Leigh to Vera Miles, to use a metaphor. He shows us one character ends who we were invested in, and at the same time, in the other side of the frame, the other character, the protagonist we're following, our pursuit, our journey with that protagonist begins. And we don't need any elaborate introductions. We don't need all these, other things that would eat up time in the movie. He just does it visually, and it's instantaneous. And I think that's a very daring and sort of canny use of the split screen. One character dies while the other character becomes our focal point of interest, and I just think that's fascinating. And I don't know anybody else who's done that. Probably somebody has, but I think it's pretty amazing that that's how he chose to use the split screen.
It's also, specific to Sisters and possibly Dressed to Kill. It does kind of mirror the split in the lead character that we're talking about. I mean, this is a movie about Siamese twins that were separated.
Well, that's it exactly. And you're right to bring up Dressed to Kill, and also Raising Cain, which is about someone with multiple personalities, and the way that film uses like hallucination and delusion and dream within dream. It reflects the character's splintered psyche. And here, the split screen giving us two things is very much, as you say, a reflection of the movie's thematic core, which is the idea of this woman with the split psyche. And to me, this is a personal thing, but to me, as a film critic, sort of that's the sort of highest level of perfection and quality a movie can aspire to, which is that the form, what we're watching, the visuals, reflect the content or augment the content. That's how all films should work. What's happening in the story should be contained in the visuals. We should be able to by the way the visuals are expressed, understand something about the movie's content, and that's the reason why De Palma is my all-time favorite, because he does that all the time. But you look at most movies today, and they don't bother with that.
Talking about Carrie, getting into Carrie,
Pauline Kael said that watching Carrie was like a teenager's dirty joke sustained for 2 hours, something like that. I'm paraphrasing wildly.
Yeah.
It was a quote very much like that, and I think that's true. He's getting at a lot of things there. He's getting at the metaphor, of high school. Carrie White burns in hell. Yes, that hell is high school. There's that idea to it. There's the idea of awakening. There's also, the idea there, in the era of the ERA, very shortly after the Roe v. Wade decision, of a woman reckoning with her own sexual power. I mean, this was not a small thing. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to reduce, the rights argument on this to superficialities, but the idea is, you don't want a woman to have the pill because she then has sexual power. She can have sex with anybody. There isn't the responsibility associated with sex. And so I also think in Carrie is encapsulated the 70s idea of the fear of the liberated female, of a woman who achieves adulthood, is indoctrinated into the world of sexuality and has enormous power, and wow, isn't that frightening? But I think it's a joke on that. I don't think that that's what De Palma is saying, because I mean, he's a leftist and an anti-establishment, so he's not carrying the water for the the sort of repressive rights argument. He's sort of making a joke of this. It's a metaphor for that. I don't know. You could write a whole essay about that opening scene, because
I think so too.
On so many levels.
Yeah, and it automatically establishes an empathy for Carrie that carries throughout the film. And I think those opening minutes, it tells you everything you need to know about the conflicts of that character. I mean, we talk about the adolescent sexuality. We talk about the menstruation and the fear and the shame, and how her classmates respond to it, her outsider status. I mean, it's really incredibly efficient as well as imaginative, that opening couple of minutes.
Absolutely. I mean, and just the idea, and I mean, you have to credit Stephen King with coming up with the narrative, but you credit Brian De Palma for the way that it comes together, which is that the idea that the menstrual blood and her psychic power come together. It is like in becoming adults that this double, this curse or what is it? That's when this lands. It's just very interesting. I mean, there are just so many ways to read the film, but it's a wonderful opening to a really great 70s horror film. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and again, there are strange goings on throughout the film, obviously with the relationship with the mother and the telekinesis aspects of it. Mm-hmm. But for most of its running time, I've always found that it plays almost like a John Hughes teen movie. I mean, and so when it goes to absolute hell at the end, I mean, you feel it tenfold, because you've been kind of lulled into this state of, this is what adolescence, the horror of adolescence, and then it goes to hell.
I couldn't agree with you more. The universality of that experience, just of being somebody who maybe was shy in school, you so empathize with her, and you become an advocate for her. Like, I want things to turn out okay for her, and mm-hmm. and the thing is that that's perfect. This is how horror really works, and De Palma, is very clever to do it this way. That so we're so focused on that, on our feelings for her. She's shy. Look how pretty she looks, all dressed up. This could change everything. We're thinking about all of these almost soap opera things, and we're totally consumed by them, because Sissy Spacek is such a wonderful performer and projects such innocence and sweetness in that role. So we're really looking at this sort of little micro state of Carrie, and then it goes to this other thing. I mean, and if you look at how the prom scene starts, it starts out like some kind of adolescent fantasy. She had no expectation to win prom queen, and you get up and they circle and they dance, and she's dancing with William Catt, and they look into each other's eyes, and it's the slow motion again, and it's mm-hmm. like, oh my gosh, it is, you're like watching a teen romance, and the thing is, it doesn't come off as cliche. You're totally swept up in it, and then of course the horror lands on you again, and it's and it's shocking and horrible, and and then it asks you to really contextualize Carrie for what she did, because she even takes down her coach, who was kind to her, Betty Buckley. She even sort of blasts her with a psychic wave during that the scene in the prom there, and then you have to ask yourself, you've invested so strongly in this girl, now look what she's doing. I think it's very interesting. I think horror movies really get to some kind of core value when you're like sympathizing with the monster, but also saying, I wish she hadn't done that. If she hadn't done that, I still would have been with her, because those girls deserved it. But Betty Buckley didn't deserve it. You're sympathizing with the monster, in a way, in a very powerful way.
It's those conflicted loyalties again, that
right.
creep up in his work. I guess this is a good time to talk about his work with actors and the kinds of performances he pulls out of them, because Sissy Spacek, which is almost unheard of for this kind of movie, she got an Oscar nomination for this film, and then you have Piper Laurie, who was just given free rein to be as bold as she wanted to, and really find the humor in that character. Where do you see the performance level that he gets from actors?
I think I think it's a high level. I think he always does extremely well with actors, but I think the core to understand about De Palma is that the actors are another part of the language that he's using. It's another piece of film, another piece of film language, and so he knows how to deploy them to their best advantage, I think. Mm-hmm. Very rarely is there a bummer of a performance in a De Palma film. The only thing, I really liked Redacted, but Redacted being a different sort of, it was a different aesthetic, and where it was really trying to ape very much, concrete our consensus reality. It was with the handheld cams and the different media, which was very courageous and interesting. But the performance, it's very hard even for the best actors to somehow make it seem like absolutely concrete real. You know what I'm saying? That's just, so that would be the only thing I'd say. Well, some of the performances were wavery, but. No, I just think that, the thing about De Palma is that you can't really point to any area where he doesn't deploy, the aspect of film that he's using in a powerful and meaningful way. And, it goes down to people who aren't usually mentioned. Like William Catt. I think William Catt is great in that movie. It's a small part, but he nails it, Mm-hmm. It's not a showy part, but he just does great with this curly-haired, happy-go-lucky guy,
Yeah.
His girlfriend asked him to do something. He thinks, well, why am I doing it? She says, just do it. It's okay, but you feel like he likes Carrie, too, Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. But again, it's the conflict you talk about. We don't ever know exactly how he feels about it. He does it. But why? But it's such an interesting performance that you believe this guy would just do that. How many guys would do that who are, they're dating the most popular girl and she says, take the girl everybody hates to the prom? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
He has no worries. He has no problems in life, that guy.
Right, exactly. It's just a very interesting performance, and there's something, because I'm sure he was probably in his 20s. I don't know if we could look on the IMDb or something, but he projects some kind of, like Sissy Spacek, some sort of essential quality of youth very accurately, I think. He comes across as, very naive and sort of not beaten down by the world. He comes to as some sort of kind of innocent, which is really, really different from how John Travolta's character and Nancy Allen's character, are portrayed. They're just the most awful people you've ever encountered, But the thing is, they're not cartoons. We all know people who were like that in high school.
And I think another thing, people are so focused on the bravura kind of filmmaking, the camera work in De Palma's films, that they tend to overlook the performances because they're just so wowed by that other thing. And also, he's not necessarily going for realism, realistic performances.
Right. I like to call it heightened realism.
Yeah.
It's sort of like one tick over realism. You know what I mean? It does have that artificial quality, and that's okay because for the vast sweep of movie history, movies were more artificial. If you go back and watch movies from the 30s and 40s, they're extremely artificial. Because a lot of those things, were based, a lot of those actors came out of the stage, or the directors came out of the stage, so that they were very stagey and artificial. Now, you can never say that about De Palma, but he arrives in, the early 70s, which is sort of when artificiality is diminishing, and naturalism is coming in. So, he's a really interesting blend of those qualities, I think. But he's certainly more artificial than what we see now. I mean, today, we're not allowed to have those kind of big moments. People say they're cheesy or, like you said, over the top. Now, I mean, it really irks me. Anything that's made in the 70s, you read about on the internet, and people say, oh, yeah, it's so cheesy, so cheesy and campy. And what they're really saying is that people had different haircuts in the 70s. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. They see long hair on a guy, like Dirk Benedict in Battlestar Galactica, and it's it's so cheesy.
It's outdated.
Yeah,
look at the haircuts.
Right, exactly. I'm still waiting for the next release of the Star Wars movies where George Lucas will have digitally fixed Han Solo's haircut. But,
give it a haircut. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just funny how we deride everything that looks like it was from the 70s as being campy or cheesy. I mean, anytime, Battlestar Galactica, Space 1999, Star Wars, it always has to be, preceded by the word campy or cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
It's just silly. And I think that, De Palma, in some sense, fits into that. He's sort of a victim of his time in that, people did have those haircuts in his movies,
Well, with Blowout, and Blowout is actually my favorite De Palma. I mean, if I had to go back and take one De Palma film with me to an island, it would be Blowout. And I think that because I love the 70s paranoid thrillers, I love All the President's Men and Parallax View, and I'm just obsessed with those. I think this falls into that category.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's the obvious parallels, Chappaquiddick and the JFK assassination.
Mm-hmm.
So what is he saying about the political state in Blowout?
Well, I think what you're seeing is really De Palma's cynicism about the American dream, about the American political landscape, post Reagan. Just think about this. If Chappaquiddick hadn't occurred, if Ted Kennedy had won against Richard Nixon in 1972, if there had been no Chappaquiddick, the history of this country would be vastly different. Ted Kennedy was really scandalized by this. I mean, he lost all of his standing as sort of an ethical, believable human being and reasonable heir to President Kennedy and his fallen brother. There might never have been a Reagan if Kennedy had become president in 72, but he was not, or if he had become president, even in 1980, Chappaquiddick was a thing that changed him, and sort of the key to Blowout, what De Palma is saying here is that those moments where somebody really blows it are sort of they change history. And he's going a step further than that, and he's saying that film is the sort of, technique that can make or break a person. In the age of sound bites and nightly news, his movie shows in laborious detail, how movies can lie, how documentary-style footage can be faked, it can be concocted. We watch in detail as John Travolta's character, Jack. I mean, he creates a film strip of the film's car accident using, these photographic elements, and we see him laboriously, snapping frames one at a time, and then, putting on a soundtrack, and we start to see the power of images to manipulate. And again, this isn't a small deal, and every administration since Reagan has been very adept at managing visuals. You put your president, before the Statue of Liberty on the 4th of July with fireworks over him, and it creates a resonant image in your head. You land your president on an aircraft carrier with a banner that says "Mission Accomplished." You create an image. You create the reality. People believe that. You manipulate imagery to sell your product, to sell your ideology. And Blowout is very much about that. People who are very afraid that someone is going to get in and change things, so they eliminate that candidate, and then they have to eliminate the cover-up.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's very much about that, and it's very much about his cynicism because, again, there's so many symbols, of Americana in there. You got Sally, Nancy Allen's character. I mean, she's literally killed in front of a huge American flag. It's a metaphor for everything that's going wrong in America. I mean, she has a sort of a checkered history, the character, but I mean, she's basically an innocent in all this. She's just an American citizen trying to get by, and we see that innocence murdered by someone trying to follow the path to power. Fireworks are a cover for gunshots. It's so many images of Americana here are subverted and shown to be covers for a secret agenda. The Liberty Bell Jubilee, that covers, stalking and killing her. It's just very much, his cynicism about what's happening in America.
People want to believe the fantasy image that they're sold. They want to close their eyes to the darker aspects because they don't, unlike the lead character, or like the lead character, they don't want to hear too much. They don't want that final scream.
Right. Right. No, I mean, I think that's exactly true. I think we've picked again and again in our culture people to lead us who are able to most efficiently sell us the product that we most desire. I mean, that's the secret to politics. Tell us what we want to hear. And sometimes what we want to hear is we have to get our house in order, and that's good then that the person who says let's get our house in order gets elected. It's not always bad, but it can really get bad. The danger in the 2000 race, Bush versus Gore. I mean, everyone was focusing on Gore sighing, during debates, and the idea there was to sort of minimize the differences between George Bush and Al Gore. You always heard everybody saying, well, there's not really any difference between them. There's no. Yeah. They're the same, and it's because we were peaceful and prosperous. So Karl Rove and his people didn't want to say, we're going to go in a completely different direction because things were pretty good. So what happened? We focused on minutia, like, well, Al Gore is a nerd, and talking about lock boxes, and well, wow, wasn't he weird in that debate? You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
we weren't really paying attention to the substance, and as a result, we got what we got, Right?
And your take on the slasher film element of it, because it more speaks to how we don't want to be, how we are diverted by those elements, the sex and all of that, and don't see the real picture.
Exactly. I mean, I can make an argument for the artistic validity of Friday the 13th very easily. Halloween more so, which is a much better film and is a slasher film. You can make a validity for the artistry and artistic merit of those films, but they don't come from, tits and ass. They don't come from the violence. They come from, what is the film really saying? What is it really about? But that's not why all the slasher films are made. There are plenty of films just like the one in the movie, grade Z slasher films, which are just about do the formula, get it out quick. It'll make money in the first week and we'll be rich. Some critics call them nice kill films or fast playoffs. You need a snappy title about a holiday. You need someone in a mask killing people, and you need lots of tits and ass. And there is that cynicism. But I mean, you can look at Friday the 13th and say no, it has artistic merit. Not like that. It's like any form. There's the best and there's the worst, and at the bottom is at its most cynical and formulaic and most manipulative, and at the top are the things where there's actually something going on in the story, that's meaningful in the culture. So I don't want to paint slasher movies with just one brush, because I like slasher films. I like good slasher films. So I like to say, right? If a slasher film's good, I like it, but I don't like the bad ones. The bad ones are misogynist. The bad ones are leering. They're sort of devoid of artistry and devoid of humanity. And I think that what De Palma is saying in Blowout is that that's it's that cynicism with America again. Now the movies that are being made are these sort of cynical cash grabs, devoid of characters, devoid of meaning, devoid of beauty and filled with violence. And that's very different from his films, because his films do have beauty. The violence has meaning. The characters do stay with you, for the most part, just like we were talking about with Carrie. I think, again, it's like somebody who's sort of working at the top of the genre, looking down, saying, like, not everybody is a John Carpenter. Not everybody is a Wes Craven. There's also these guys down here. But he's drawing the connection between that emptiness and cynicism with the emptiness and cynicism he sees in politics. See, that's what I think the connection is.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect sense. And with the characters, I wanted to discuss just quickly these two lead characters in Blowout. Starting with Nancy Allen's character, the prostitute, which might come off as just that, the prostitute in any other film. How does he distinguish that character? What's unique about her?
Well, what you could say this is a cliche, but I mean, she really is the prostitute with the heart of gold. You see, it's very interesting. She's just trying to make it. She is an innocent, despite the fact that she has sex for money. She is an absolute innocent. She believes the things that people tell her. She doesn't think there could be a conspiracy. She wants to work in the movies and do makeup. She has dreams. She's part of the American dream. I think she's part of the sort of gullible, silent majority. People like. Why do people vote against their self-interest? Like, why don't you want the taxes to be raised on the richest people in this country who make so much money and own like 98% of the wealth? Well, because you think one day you're going to be one of those people, because you believe in the American dream, because you work hard every day, because you save your money, because you do the things that you think are going to do to put you in that class, and you don't want to see that class punished for succeeding. And she is that person. She's that person who is trying to make it. She believes in the American dream, and she believes she can work in the movie. She despite the fact that she's a prostitute, and I know that sounds strange, but she is complete innocence. And so when she is killed in front of the American flag, it's the American sense of innocence being murdered in the film. That's really my belief. She is such a sweet person in that film.
I think so too. And you say she has the kind of blind optimism. She wants to live in that fantasy. Yeah. And Travolta's character is going after the truth. He wants to expose the underbelly in a way, and he's haunted by it by the end of the film. I mean, she's murdered, and he's probably eternally haunted by what he knows and what he's seen and heard. Who's better off?
Exactly. And I think the Jack character, the John Travolta character, I think that he represents the final death knell of political activism in the country. Because if you look into his background in the film, he worked on something called the Cain Commission, and it ended very badly for him. That was his previous foray into politics. He was very disillusioned by how that turned out. Yeah. And then when he comes into this again and interfaces with politics again, he thinks he can change it, he can expose it, he can get the truth out. And what happens is this lovely, sweet woman dies, and, what dies with him is the belief that he can make a difference, that he can change. And I think that's the death of the 1960s counterculture right there. And his agreement, his really strange act of putting her scream into the film is almost like he's buying into the yuppie dream at that point. He's saying, I'm going to trade in the activism for stock options in a corner office because I can't change anything. He's resigned. Well, I guess I'm going to be a part of this system now, Yeah. And the inclusion of that scream in that lousy, cynical, lacking in human dimension horror film, is his final act of resignation. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's just
God, what a great movie.
It is, and it's a fantastic movie. And I think the critical and popular consensus is that it is De Palma's best movie, but it was a box office bust. But probably because again, people don't want to hear negative things.
Yeah. I guess the last film that we'll be discussing is Raising Cain, which Dressed to Kill. I mean, a lot of these films deal so intimately with female sexuality.
Right.
And Raising Cain is really it's as you describe it, I think as a social satire on the crisis of masculinity.
I see that absolutely. I mean, if you look at context again, historical context in the 1990s, and you watch Raising Cain, I mean, it's very clear that it's about this crisis in American masculinity. I mean, it was sort of post Mr. Mom. There was more equality in the workplace. More women were out at work. Reagan, the cowboy, very alpha male president, had been replaced by his sort of underling who was always described as a wimp, George Bush. Women served with distinction in the first Gulf War. And there was this blurring of traditional definitions of gender and gender roles, and there were all of these sort of sex-based kerfuffles in the 90s. The Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill situation. There was, the Year of the Woman running for winning in the Senate in '92, I believe it was. It was all these elements where traditional masculinity, some people were saying, that it was being threatened, that the culture was being feminized by women's equality in war, in politics, in the workplace, all those things. Now, I'm not saying that I necessarily believe that we've been feminized, or that it would even be bad that we were more feminized. I don't have an opinion on that, but I think that's clearly the context underlining Raising Cain. And you've got this character, Carter Nix, who is really a milquetoast, and he's a psychologist, but he'll never be the alpha male that his father was. His father was a great psychologist. He's just a workaday psychologist. He's given up his job to stay in the home and raise his child, Amy. And even when he's having intercourse with his wife, he has to stop and go check on Amy, who might be having a nightmare. And it's clear that his wife, Lolita Davidovich in the film, is very upset about that. And this idea that he can't be the man she wants him to be. She even has an affair with a much sort of more traditionally attractive, macho kind of guy. Mm-hmm. Carter, with his multiple personality syndrome, begins to invent other characters who address some aspect of that masculinity. He's got the bad boy part of him, the sibling, the brother. And then what I find absolutely fascinating is that the strongest, most powerful character in his multiple personality realm there is a woman, Margot. He literally becomes more of a man by becoming a woman at the end of the film, which is probably the ultimate statement on the crisis of masculinity in 1990s horror cinema right there. So, I mean, it's just a very fascinating film. And, I think what's the scene that just blows me away in that movie, it's not just the ending scene and what it signifies, but it's the scene where the psychiatrist, played by Frances Sternhagen, Dr. Waldheim, I think her name was, explains basically the whole chaotic terrain of Carter Nix's mind from top to bottom, like in one unbroken shot while walking through many layers of a police station, like going from the office level down to the lobby level and finally ending in the morgue. I mean, it's like a tour of his mind, and it's just astonishing. It's just virtuoso, hypnotic filmmaking. Is it
also? I think it's this scene that they talk about, if I'm not mistaken. The people kind of dismissed it as a takeoff on what many consider the most kind of boring scene in Psycho, the explanation scene.
Right.
Yeah, where they always say that's the weakest scene that Hitchcock ever directed.
You bring up a brilliant point here, which leads into another, really critical aspect of the film. The film, I say form sort of echoes content. That's the important thing. Is that the film is about a guy who can't live up to his spiritual father. It's Carter and his biological father, and Carter's father, the great, world-renowned psychologist. But Raising Cain is made by the guy who can't live up to his spiritual father, or so people say. We keep saying he's the next Hitchcock, but then the critics keep disappointed by his next movie. And so it's like there's a self-reflexive quality here, which was part and parcel of the 90s, that it's about Brian De Palma dealing with the ghost of his spiritual father, Alfred Hitchcock. And so he's got to, not that he's got to one-up him, but in a way, by doing that scene that outdoes the scene in Psycho by, quite a bit, he's proving he doesn't suffer from that emasculating psychological problem.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, there's also lots of elements. It's interesting. I'm not sure if I could verbalize it, but there's also lots of elements of his previous work in the film, and you could almost, the baby carriage down the stairs and in the climax, and you can almost say, I did this. I did this. Isn't this worthy of Hitchcock in a way, mirroring the character wanting to be worthy of his father.
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. It's like him saying, it's like I say this is Brian De Palma's thriller zenith in a way. Some of the other thrillers, we may look at and say they're actually, better films, but this one is the zenith as far as how he views them. It's like his master's thesis. He's like pulling in qualities from all of his other movies and saying, this is what I brought to the thriller. And does it or does it not outdo Alfred Hitchcock? I mean, I don't think there's any shame in that, to say, I think it does, frankly. Alfred Hitchcock is great. I love Alfred Hitchcock. He's great, but he's also a product of his time, and because De Palma comes at a later time, he gets to build on what Hitchcock did. He gets to build on what Hitchcock created. So, yes, we would expect him to be better, and I think, in fact, he is better. He's more canny. He's able to do things quicker. He's able to get his points across more cannily. He has more freedom in terms of the violence and kind of explicit material he can showcase. Alfred Hitchcock was hamstrung by that in the 50s and 60s. Now, and by the same token, I say, somebody could come along. I don't think we've met that person yet, but somebody could come along and take everything that De Palma has done and build on that and have the next generation. And in theory, that person should be better than De Palma and Hitchcock. Now, I don't think we've met that person yet, but I don't preclude the possibility. And I don't think there's any shame in saying he's better than Hitchcock. He has some advantages that Hitchcock doesn't. Just the fact that he comes later in film history, where we have better technology, it makes things easier for him in some sense. What he can imagine, he can bring to the screen more readily than what Hitchcock imagined that he could bring to the screen. Special effects have improved. Cameras improved. We have the Steadicam. Hitchcock didn't get to use a Steadicam. So it's foolish and antiquarian to just say Hitchcock will always be the best. Because that's, he didn't have all the advantages. He was the best for his time period, and we still watch him because he's so important. But De Palma is very much the best in his time period as well. And like I said, that doesn't at all preclude the possibility that somebody else who synthesizes all this material will be the best of their time period, and that time period is still to come. For a while, I thought that might be David Fincher. I still hope it would be David Fincher. I could see how that may be possible. I don't know. We'll have to get further down in his career to see. Maybe if we're still around in 20 years, we can reconvene.
Yeah, he's kind of taken a different direction. I think it's great. He's not being pigeonholed by which he could have easily been with Success of Seven. But some of his films are the work of a great novelist filmmaker in a way, I think. Right.
Very interesting. It's very interesting. But we always want to worship Hitchcock, and he's enormously. He's eminently worshipped. He deserves to be worshipped. He's eminently deserving of such worship. But so is De Palma, because he took the next step. And I'd like to see more people, admit that.
Do you think that there will be a reassessment of him years from now?
Well, here's the problem with that. There should be a reassessment, I believe. Actually, he's my favorite filmmaker. I think he's absolute top. Nobody can orchestrate an action scene the way he can. No one can orchestrate this paradigm of form, echoing content the way he can. But we live in a very different culture now than when Hitchcock rose. We are so polarized in this culture, and as I said. De Palma has been tagged as a leftist. I mean, Bill O'Reilly and others on the right on Fox went after him big time about Redacted. The polarization of today's America, there's always going to be 50% of the people who refuse to sort of acknowledge De Palma as the master he is, because they're going to say he's a liberal. His films are liberal.
Right.
Hitchcock never had to deal with that level of polarization. Hitchcock is universally praised. You have to be a real contrarian, to say that. But because of the times we live in, and unless this changes, and I don't see it changing, that De Palma is always going to be viewed through the lens of being a liberal, and so that as long as there are outlets like Fox and Tucker Carlson, all those people. There's going to be they're always going to paint him with that brush. I think. I mean, I think that's really unfortunate. But
and they're kind of simpletons that cannot recognize metaphor. And essentially Redacted is in many ways the same movie as Casualties of War, and I think that's intentional because his point is nothing's changed.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I totally agree. But that people say he didn't. He wasn't respectful enough of the troops. That he's not supporting our troops, and that's like the de facto argument.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you say that, there's like going to be a whole swath of people that won't support you. You don't support the troops. It's just it's sort of a crazy kind of hypocrisy.
It's impossible to get out from under that kind of.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, the thinking is so narrow there. But I mean, as far as film critics go, I don't know, because even film criticism has taken a very strange turn with the internet. I mean, I'm all there are great online critics. There are online critics that are fantastic, every bit as good as print critics. That to television critics, the same thing. But there's just been this vast opening of the field, and we don't know really whose voice is going to dominate in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people just write reviews not based on the things you very clearly have enunciated in your interview with me, that you understand, the metaphors, the film technique, the form echoing content. They don't look at anything like that. They look at, well, did this movie entertain me? Did I like the story? There's a whole lot of that substituting for criticism right now.
Yeah.
And as long as that's the case, people are going to just go look at his movies and go, huh?
We're losing the power of critical thought, and there's so little of it out there. I mean, you really got to sift through a lot of trash to find it.
Yeah, and it's not, and like I said, there are many great online critics. There are many great TV critics. That so I mean, the voices are there, but it is harder to find them. There are so many, and every opinion on the internet is quote unquote equal in a way, and so people who don't have training in film, or who don't study criticism, or who don't know much about history even, you go into a De Palma film and you're baffled. What the hell is this about? What does it say? I mean, you look at Raising Cain, you don't know it was made in '92, and you don't know what was going on in the culture, and it's just Lithgow playing different roles, and in the end he's a woman. But what does that mean? If you're not remembering what was happening in that era, you don't know what that means. We're not equal. I mean, this sounds really terrible, but many of us are not equal to the films he's made. That sounds horribly elitist and rotten.
No, I think you're right. Yeah.
But I think it's true. I think at this point, I think he's smarter than a lot of his audience. In the way he creates films. Other people aren't making films in this mode except Tarantino. And Tarantino is popular, so maybe I'm wrong.
That's why I'm hopeful that the reassessment occurs and one day we catch up.
Yeah.
So where De Palma's been.
See, I'm saying I'm smart and everyone else is stupid. That is so awful. I'm so
No. It's clearly the truth. One last point about Raising Cain. I think a friend told me an anecdote that he read from Tarantino. After Raising Cain, Tarantino approached De Palma and said, "You must have been really burned by the reception of Casualties of War, and because Raising Cain struck him as a really pissed off movie." And it's even, as you point out, it's even inherent in the title. He's raising Cain. He's going to raise hell with this movie.
Exactly, and he does. He certainly does. I mean, it's a bracing film, but really all of his films are. It's like a strong wind hits you in the face because it's so filled with ideas. And see, this is the difference, and this is the thing that I wish I could sometimes get people to understand, who don't like his work. It's like, it's not just the ideas of his stories. Like, accept that and deal with what the stories are. It's how he expresses it. It's the ideas in his expression that are so important and so masterful. And that's why he's such a great artist. I mean, to me, is that, how he expresses his ideas is so eloquent, it's so surprising, so lyrical, so poetic. I mean, he's just great. He's just great. When I did that De Palma retrospective last year and rewatched so many of his films and reviewed them, I just realized this is the guy. For me, this is the guy. This is like the idealized film director for me. He is really it. Because he's just done so many different kinds of things, and he's done them all so well. And there is such value in his films. Even if you question, well, why do a narrative about, I don't know, split personality? Well, why did Hitchcock do it? But even if you value the narrative, look at how he vets it. Look at how he expresses it. It's just so daring. It's gamesmanship of the highest order, challenging us to keep up. And how, as a film goer, an enthusiastic film goer, can you not love that challenge? How can you not take that challenge?
I feel the same way. So I'm just so honored that to do these shows and to have you take part in them. You've given me almost 2 hours of your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I cannot thank you enough.